Welcome to the Reform Party Platform Committee discussion on the newly revised and adopted party platform. The Reform Party is dedicated to electing citizens who want to serve their communities and make accountability, honest leadership, and solutions the cornerstones of their term of service. Joining me tonight is Richard Walker, our platform vice chair, and also the party secretary. Sam Gibbons is with us, who is a platform member and the vice chair of communications for the party. And I am Jim Bacon, just your lowly platform member. Our last episode, we talked about the economy and job market. We talked about energy and the environment. And we talked about tax policy. Before we go on to today's topics, we got to take care of some business. We got to pay the bills, as it were. The Reform Party operates on resources provided by volunteers. Financial resources are applied to tools and services for communication, organizing, and outreach. Volunteer hours and experience are applied to using these tools wisely. If you agree with the values and platform of this organization, please consider adding your voice and other resources to our collective effort to promote better governance in all locations in the United States. Visit our website at reformparty.org. Follow Get Involved to start communicating with us, and click Contribute to provide financial resources to the Reform Party. Thank you. Moving on. This episode, we're going to cover government and ethics, election process, and individual rights and freedoms. Right. Starting out with government and ethics is going to be Rich.
Thanks, Jim. The first level language for government and ethics, fairly brief. The Reform Party exhibits and promotes high ethical standards and expects our candidates and all elected officials to do the same.
The Reform Party believes that democracy requires all levels of government to adhere to ethical standards, and office holders' influence should be solely for the benefit of their constituents and in service to their oath to the U.S. Constitution. Public servants, elected and appointed, will find themselves privy to non-public information. Public servants must not be allowed to take measures to profit from this information. Likewise, non-government entities, which as a reference here is defined in the Code of Federal Regulations, which can be found on our website. So likewise, these non-government entities must not inappropriately benefit from their relationship with public officials.
Activities that yield an unexplained advantage to any party, in government or not, must be examined for ethical breaches. Ethical areas to be monitored include lobbying irregularities, campaign fundraising, committee assignments, i.e. political affiliation as a consideration or conflicts of interest, office holder investment transparency and limitations, insider trading, office holder benefits, including compensation and retirement. The Reform Party seeks the enforcement of laws and regulations with new legislation as needed that address the above concerns.
We're short of our fearless leader, Rick, tonight. We don't have as much on the historical context for how this has been around, but I feel like this has been, if not a long-running stance for the Reform Party, a long-running concern and critique of most of American politics.
And as I understand it, this was one of the primary positions for Ross Perot when he first started in '92.
Well, ethics and transparency were, I don't know if you want to call them background or foreground, but they were themes in both of Mr. Perot's runs.
So we are standing upon some solid shoulders by putting emphasis on this.
One of the things that I liked that we added was I feel like there's a lot of people that just think about elected officials, but we made sure to talk about elected and appointed. So people that are within the confines of federal or state or local service, right? That have jobs in these positions, fall under the same kind of expectations for ethical behavior.
Although we didn't name it specifically, this also would cover hiring practices for civil servants.
You're talking about people coming into civil service,
Yeah,
or going
right.
back out into the private sector?
Well, both, but just coming in, I can see there could be some favoritism on who gets hired and who doesn't. And once they're in a particular job, being able to take advantage of it.
There are, and okay, another place I got to claim some ignorance, and I can claim it just about everywhere. There's something called patronage positions. Is that terminology that's used where you are?
No, I know of it, but
the terminology, I used to hear it more frequently when I lived over in the Buffalo, New York area. A patronage position is basically when a politician gets elected and there's certain office positions or staff positions that they can bring in whoever they want into. So it can be people from their campaign, friends, relatives. And this is something where it kind of raises an eyebrow from time to time as to who gets to work a government job after somebody gets elected.
Well, that's been a concern ever since day one for the country. There's a really big deal in the 1800s. And even today, that's basically 99% of all of the White House positions.
Well, the spoil system is kind of what it was referred to.
Yeah.
I guess down in the South, we would call that the good old boy system, right? Where you have to know people, the political connections or what gets you certain positions, or nepotism in general, like kind of hypocritical in how we view that within the United States, or how we continue to allow this within our country, but then view that in a very negative light in other developing regions of the world where, it's like, oh, well, this is why they're having problems. They're engaged in nepotism and the spoil system. And this is like, we haven't fixed that problem here.
Yes. I don't think we can do away with it entirely. I don't think there's any way to stamp it out or that you even need to, but it does need to be monitored closely for abuse.
I would agree. For us, one of the issues that I've run into is, when you're trying to build a party, this isn't necessarily directly to this, but when we're trying to build our state parties from the ground up, I find myself leaning on people that I know, because it's hard to find people that I don't know that have the skills that we need in order to get certain things done for now.
That's a challenge as you build out an organization. And that's, a question of, in government, what positions ought to just be hired positions and not go vacant when someone leaves office and somebody fresh comes in. Something I think about this as people, and this is in our stance, we talk about some of this with people that leave government and go into a private sector position where, it's basically somebody that they encountered while in their government position. And you open the specter of, is this some sort of, favoritism being shown? Is this some sort of sweetheart deal that was negotiated or something like this? Or is this just two people who got to know each other well? So when somebody left government, the other person hired them. Those are difficult.
Yeah. I remember learning about that in school. They used Japan as an example, and I tried to find the name, and I think this was the right name for it. essentially translated as descendant from heaven, right? Like formal top level government officials that will get just snatched up by companies that really could utilize their insider knowledge of the workings of the bureaucracy. It's certainly not unique to the United States.
This comes back to a topic of transparency, which we cover elsewhere. The more transparent government functions are, the less special knowledge there is.
And thinking about it, in some respects, the revolving door from government to lobbying firms, for example, in my mind, tends to go against the initial concept or desire for our legislature to be citizen legislators. In other words, they come in, they serve for a while, then go back to their private lives. But instead, they come in, they remain in Congress for, well, I'll say too long, and then continue in government as lobbyists. They don't ever leave government once they get in.
Yeah, because essentially the skills that they gain become more valuable than, the jobs that they had previously.
Yeah. I think a notable exception, one notable exception, I think would be like Jim Webb. I'm not aware of him being part of any lobbying effort or anything like that.
Well, I suspect this is another thing where the ones we notice are the ones that are not good actors, basically. They do something suspicious or nefarious, and the ones we don't notice are the ones that basically did it well.
Yeah.
Is there anything else we wanted to address specifically, like, how in essentially the second paragraph, when we're talking about privy to non-public information and that they should not inappropriately benefit from that, we're really looking at the impact of, I guess, essentially insider trading, right?
That's been a problem.
And how could we in future papers look at that? Again, this is kind of hearsay, but we might hit a point where we advocate for changes. Well, actually, it says down there at the bottom, we might seek to enforce laws or regulations. Like, it might be that if you join Congress, maybe you should not have control of your investments till you're done.
It's a touchy area. Last night, we had somebody ask us about ethics, and we gave our definition of honesty and being true to the people. But at the same time, on insider trading, yes, it's wrong. But to me, it seems drastic that a person would have to give up control of their investments. To me, that once again, that goes counter to the idea of being citizen legislators. I mean, if there's an expectation that a member of Congress can serve for, let's say, 2 or 3 terms, 2 terms for a term, I mean, just for sake of discussion, they come in, they serve and get out. They have to be able to go back and step into their business and not start over. They have to have a way to keep that running.
Well, yeah, I don't think the recommendation would be that they sell the stock, but that it just goes into a managed fund that they don't necessarily have access to directly to direct. But again, like these are the things where we talk about these value statements that we have. We don't think that insider trading should be prevalent. Now we can debate, how do we hit that point?
What sort of policy can we promote? One of the things, the common one is, to require their investments to go into a trust or something like this while they're in office. Although it requires management effort, and this is something, we will debate, because there's more than one option, more than 2. There should be several. There could also be a quiet period kind of structure like there is with company insiders. Before a earnings announcement, there's a period of like a month, 6 weeks, that somebody who's in management in a company cannot trade their own stock. Once everything's public and the information's out, then they can start trading stock again if they wish. But that's something that's standard in the corporate world with any company that has publicly traded stock. And it might be something similar where companies get flagged or industries get flagged or something for Congress. And it's like, no, we're in a quiet period right now because earnings season's coming, whatever. If you're holding it, that's fine. But the buying and selling needs to pause during this period.
Actually, I think the compromise on that would be whenever a piece of legislation is introduced, it should be analyzed what industries are going to be affected, what stocks will be affected. And at that point, any trading on those stocks would be prohibited by members of Congress until after a law is passed and announced and it takes effect.
Yes. There's, I mean, we'll talk this through and we're going to come up with something that's going to be hopefully well thought out and ethical and smart.
And we're going to need a lot of expert help crafting the white paper on this one.
Yes.
And that goes back to our call for volunteers. If anyone listening has got experience with this, good knowledge, or good ideas to offer, please get in touch with us. We're not going to ask that you join the party to help on this. We're going to ask that you contribute knowledge.
Yes. I mean, we can research ourselves and we will, but somebody who's actually worked inside that environment for a period of time, that's gold. I mean, that's...
Yeah. Anything else we want to do? Lobbying irregularities, campaign fundraising, committee assignments. I think we've pretty well touched on everything else.
Yeah.
We could definitely go on. You want to transition?
We only have so much time.
Yeah. This time.
Yes.
We'll definitely be digging into these in public meetings and in other spaces, but this is just trying to give people an insight into where we're at now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, look, and it's going to be me.
Yeah, we're transitioning to election process.
Yep. So I'm going to start off with the first level of election process for you. The Reform Party actively supports education and participation in our government's administration of elections. We hold officials and lawmakers responsible for ensuring ethical and transparent elections. The Reform Party keeps a critical eye on campaign regulations and oversight. Although campaigns are private activities, our government must maintain regulations to prevent harm to the public's trust in the election process.
Starting in on the second level of election process, the Reform Party will continue to propose improvements to government election processes as well as private campaign processes. All positions of trust and authority should reflect the voters as individuals of the location they serve. We will remain skeptical of corporate, industry, political, and other special interest groups who seek or receive greater participation in government policy than the voters. Government election processes include voting and election administration, ballot access validation, and redistricting. Regulation of campaigns and lobbying includes campaign regulation, fundraising and use of funds regulation, ballot access requirements, candidate campaign and lobbying enforcement.
The Reform Party holds government officials and lawmakers responsible for ensuring reasonable and convenient access to voter registration, voting, and candidacy for all eligible voters and those seeking a position on the ballot access. The Reform Party promotes voting methods that encourage greater voter participation and election transparency. To this end, we support ranked choice voting, RCV, score voting, and none of the above, NOTA, along with other voting methods that increase the likelihood of the election winner being the candidate who best reflects the will of the community. We oppose voting methods and ballot rules that discourage participation in the election process or leave voters without the ability to express dissent.
Congressional districts are redrawn after each U.S. Census. The Reform Party will monitor this process and take appropriate action when districts are proposed that are not compact, do not reflect complete communities, or do not follow existing political boundaries, such as county borders, where possible. We believe that gerrymandering inhibits the political expression of a local community. Each member of Congress is obligated to represent the public interest. The Reform Party will ensure that the lobbying practices are established to provide an appropriate connection where the public interest intersects with private interest. Campaign finance regulations must not place an undue burden on candidates or parties. The Reform Party believes that candidates and political parties must have reasonable access to placement on state and local ballots and participation in election debates. However, campaign and lobbying legislation must include enforcement actions and authorities. Consistent, competent, and effective enforcement will keep political parties and candidate campaigns compliant with the governing election law.
Yeah, election confidence, things going smoothly in election, comfortably in election. It's not a easy or it's hard to take out the specters of concern, of fear, of misunderstood practices and this sort of thing from running elections. I am very happy that everything I've witnessed with elections in my life has been very smooth and organized, and that people are willing to work the polling places and keep everything going according to procedure. And the procedures are well thought out.
I got a question for you since you're up in New York. It's a bit of a tangent. I know that in the past, I've heard in the past that with the mechanical election machines that New York had, it was possible to vote a straight party ticket by pulling one lever.
I never saw that. Maybe it was. If it was some button I didn't know about.
Because that's something that, in my mind, is covered by this. Just automatic voting a straight party ticket seems to, or making that possible, seems to go against the idea of having responsible voters.
I would have to, I want to answer with complete confidence, but I never looked at those voting machines with that question on my mind. There was never a sign or an arrow or anything that says, here's the magic lever for all straight line anything. It was much as our ballots appear. You have, certain judge positions, pick any two, and you move the lever for two. A congressional seat, select one, and you've got 3 or 4 lines, and you move the lever for the one you want. And when you're all done, there was one main lever that made all the wheels turn and counted all your votes. Those are all the levers I saw. I don't know of any others that existed. So I can't disprove it because I never looked for that. But I never heard it and I never saw it.
Oh, I can tell you here in South Carolina, there's absolutely a button on our electronic voting machines to vote straight party.
Oh, my.
Personally, I think that ought to be outlawed.
Well,
yes, it should.
I don't disagree. Actually, that was brought up in a conversation tonight at another meeting that I was at, where somebody expressed concern of, how is ranked choice voting supposed to work whenever people vote straight party? And I guess the simple answer is you can't vote straight party.
Right. That's where
I mean,
that's where
I
I was
guess
going
you
with
could
this.
if you had multiple people running within an election that were on the same party. Um,
Well, you have
but
with
I
rank.
don't.
Oh, I'm sorry. Finish.
No, I just don't think that that kind of defeats the purpose. So
With ranked choice, just like you have now, you can choose a candidate or you can choose nobody, and then go to the next position and either choose somebody or choose nobody.
yeah,
So with ranked choice, you may have 5 or 6 options. You don't have to rank them all.
right.
You can have 1, 2, 3 and stop, or just one and stop. And basically, if your one ends up being eliminated off the bottom, then it's the same as you filled in nothing.
Something else that needs to have some teeth behind it is none of the above. We actually have that here in Nevada, but it doesn't have any teeth behind it. All it is expressing an opinion.
It's a no
Meaning that,
confidence vote.
yeah, it means that should none of the above actually win the election, it doesn't mean that there's a new election or anything.
Ah, okay. And that's a good point. With none of the above, if that wins, you're right. That means the majority does not want any of the candidates listed.
All right, this should force a new election.
Yes.
I don't even know if so my thought on none of the above voting like that would be if people vote enough for none of the above where neither candidate gets 50%, I think that is another election.
In a simple majority system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that really a simple majority, like ranked choice voting, is still looking to achieve a simple majority.
Yes. Eventually. Yes.
Yeah.
If it doesn't happen in the first round, it saves you from having to run a new election.
Instant runoff voting. And this is where I guess I'll speak more as the vice chairman of comms. I think that, and I've said this to y'all plenty of times, I think that alternative voting methods are going to have to be the catalyst for third parties in the country, right? That if those that are listening to us can help twist the arm of legislators to allow opportunities for other parties to be present and you not quote unquote waste your vote. I think that's what starts to turn the tide on the strength of the two parties is you have actual alternatives that they can't fear-monger you into not picking.
That touches on ballot access also. First, you have to get the third-party candidates or even independent candidates on the ballot. People need to have a choice of more than just D or R.
Yes.
Now, California, I believe, has pulled an end run on their ranked choice voting system, at least in the primaries, where only the top 2 vote getters go on to the general election, regardless of if they're in the same party or not.
Yeah.
And in California, it's quite likely that you're going to see 2 Democrats at the general election with nobody else.
I would say that would fall well into the we oppose voting methods and ballot rules that discourage participation. I think that only allowing 2 people or 2 candidates is,
Now, here in Nevada, we have a ballot measure. It passed once. It's coming up for a second time now. We have a rather steep requirement to pass a ballot measure, but they're trying to combine ranked choice voting and open primaries in one measure. Personally, I think that should have been thrown out as violating the requirement that ballot measures be single topic. but that's beside the point. But at least here, they want to implement ranked choice voting, but the top 5 vote getters go into the general election.
Different variations have been passed in different localities, some state level, some city level. And I just want to tie back to the line that Sam read. We oppose voting methods and ballot rules that discourage participation, leaves voters without the ability to express dissent. Basically, the voting method that has been most common in this country has been the simple majority, first past the post, pick your terminology. And that has flaws in it. And that's something where the voting method, not that perfection is possible, but much better and closer is possible. So we do oppose voting methods that discourage participation. We don't want people who said, I can't vote for anybody, therefore I won't vote. We don't want voters put in that position.
But once again, and we talked about that, we talked about this extensively when we were crafting this plank on this language. First past the post or 50%, that would work if there was easy ballot access to have a lot more candidates to choose from.
If it is a simple majority as opposed to 50% plus 1, because if you have multiple candidates, the 50% plus 1 tends to break. I mean, that's why the current
idea.
Yes, well, that's why the third and the fourth become spoilers.
Yeah,
because they prevent the 50% plus 1,
which is the strength of the ranked choice. Is when you start eliminating the lowest to do the instant runoff, somebody can make it past the post instead of, because I feel like some elections, like, they don't even get 50%. Like, you can be declared the winner at less than 40. Well, if you just have the most, and that's the most problematic, or the disillusionment. And so, I would bring into question elections where voter turnout, right, where the percent of registered voters is less than 75% that turn out. If you get 40% of 50%, then you're looking at about 25% of voters that selected the person, and that is massively problematic.
Yeah, but that's a whole different question. In fact, we talked about that on Tuesday's meeting. And I'm going to state my personal opinion. And by the way, folks listening in, all of us are essentially expressing opinions. Other than when reading the actual platform language, I certainly don't speak for the party. But the other night, I expressed the opinion that I don't care if the turnout is 90% or 20%, as long as the people who turn out are people who know what they are voting on and why. I don't want people just showing up because they were told to show up and just either randomly voting or just straight party line because they don't know any different.
This also ties into sometimes the people who don't show up don't have an easy method of showing up. So that's part of the challenge too, where polling places are limited, the polling hours are limited in such a way that for some people it's impractical to get to the poll. And that's something that we want to eliminate wherever we can, because every voter, every eligible voter has a right to vote. They should know when an election's happening. That should be announced properly and widely, and they should have reasonable access. And the reasonable part gets debated a lot. So that's, you can see there's so many things in this to dig deeper on. And we've got to sort out our own positions a bit as a group so that the party can advocate for specific things beyond what's in our platform stance, like ranked choice voting, but there's a certain implementation of it that I don't know if we're seeing that would actually be better than the implementations that have happened.
Yeah.
So
And again, like as we talked about in past episodes here, ranked choice voting is going to be a new thing. And so it's going to require some adjustments and modifications as it happens. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to have growing pains. So monitoring the results and monitoring how people are using it and adjusting it so that you're getting the intended outcome is going to be important. But I think a lot of this is going to be done through local levels prior to it becoming a state or national mechanic.
Sam,
yeah.
I think you're the most knowledgeable about ranked choice voting among all of us. Consider this hypothetical.
Okay.
Using normal 50% plus one. Let's say there's 3 candidates. Candidate 1 receives, say, 40%. Candidate 2 receives 35%. And candidate 3 receives 25%. Okay. Now, in a 50% plus 1 situation, you now go to a runoff between 1 and 2.
Yep.
It is conceivable that the people who voted for candidate 3 will now vote for candidate 2 and put that candidate over the 50% mark.
Yep.
And not candidate 1. Now, can that happen with ranked choice voting? Can the person getting the second amount of votes actually wind up winning?
Yeah, it can. So again, the thing with that is you are going to rank your candidates when you're in the polling booth. So 1, 2, 3, or in this case, I guess you would do 1 and 2. So when your candidate that got 25% of the vote didn't win, okay, your second or your vote now kicks into your second choice, right? So you're still one person, one vote. You only have one vote active at a time. But when your candidate that you picked was eliminated, if you had a second vote, now that one kicks in. And I guess it would be possible, right, for candidate 2 that was at 35% to accumulate most of those votes.
If they were the second choice for
those people, but probably it's not going to be 100% ratio. Now,
right,
the thing and the benefit, because here's the thing that you don't think about. If you actually went into a true runoff election, you had to reschedule election at a later date, you would have a lower voter turnout.
Most likely.
And so that's the thing about ranked choices. You get to do that in the polling booth. And so you get the greatest amount of input instead of having to actually conduct a runoff. I was actually told by some people that I talked to on this that in the state of South Carolina, if you are a military member overseas, they will send you a ranked choice ballot. So in case there's a runoff for the candidate election that you're voting in, they have your next vote instead of having to send you another ballot overseas and you send it back. So it's possible. It's just kind of, it's different, which people don't like change, and it's threatening.
Well, it's threatening. Let's see. Okay, in Jim's example, the people who wanted the person who came in third, that person was their primary choice.
Yep.
That person came in third. Okay. Now the person who is their secondary choice becomes their vote. And there's just 3. So now, since their person came in third, they get eliminated. and now their secondary votes from anybody who voted for number 3, their secondary votes now get applied to 1 and 2, and we see if somebody makes it to 50%.
Correct.
And unless they, the majority of the number 3 people left it blank, somebody's going to make it to 50%. Although actually, if they left it blank, then they would be a non-voter. So you'd still get to 50%. So that's the idea. And number 3 got to run a complete campaign. They got to debate. They got to do everything that they wanted to do, complete fair treatment during the campaign. And all of the people who favored number 3 get to vote for their primary choice, which that means their voice is heard. They're not discouraged because they really don't like 1 or 2, and they're not in the position of, since all we have is 1 or 2, they kind of shrug their shoulders and say, well, this one's not as bad as the other. Well, at least they'd be doing that on their secondary vote if they've got number 3 in the race.
It can also change how you campaign, because if I want to be, say I'm not your number 1 guy, that's cool. If you are willing to put me as your number 2 person, though, the way that I'm going to campaign is going to be different. I'm not going to talk bad about your number 1 because I want to be your number 2.
So the candidates,
so it will, in theory, change how candidates interact, because it's not a true winner take all, right?
Right.
You can essentially get some spoils if somebody drops. So you have an incentive to campaign in a different way that isn't just based around mudslinging.
Yes.
It's going to take a little bit of time, but that's one of the perceived or anticipated side effects, latent functions of that. Or would that be manifest?
I see that that's a potential advantage or a beneficial side effect, but I'd like to add, and maybe before it suggests we move on afterwards, that I think that RCV, with all of its potential for good, can be hijacked and be turned into something horrible when it's combined with open primaries. Because that, once again, especially in the case of California, reduces the number of candidates you have at the general election. I see where ranked choice voting is fine within a party primary, but the moment you throw it open, you're defeating the purpose of greater ballot access. I think the goal is to have as many choices as possible on the general election.
Tying it back to the platform stance, we want the elections to be as fair as possible, as open as far as to candidates and to groups that have an interest and have a candidate promoting it. So everyone's heard, everyone has a chance to be heard, and it's not just an us or them ballot. One of the reasons for looking at alternative choices is the us and them feeds the vitriol in politics, where they just make sure that they're not, you don't think of them as being as awful as the other person. And that's part of the animosity that drives people away from being involved in their government in this way. And the other thing is it plays to the special interests in the money groups, because the negative advertising and the funding for that is how they win elections currently. When you only have 2 and you can play us and them. When you break the us and them game, then, as Sam said, you have to appeal to the number 3 voters too, and not talk terrible about everybody, or you're not going to be their second choice either. And if it's close, you're done. You're not going to make it. So there's no battling it out with money and negative ads. It kills a lot of that.
Yeah. There's the one last thing that I'll say, and this is the intent Again, I'm not saying that I agree with it, but this is the intent behind open primaries, is that currently most candidates are picked in primaries, which have notoriously low voter turnout and often require party membership to participate in. And so you don't get an independent voice within the primaries. But if you have open primaries where you pick the top 5, it's essentially the general election before the general election. And so the anticipated outcome is a larger voter turnout in primaries and less essentially, I don't want to call it manipulation from parties, but less centered around political parties. And I get that for us as a small party, it's kind of concerning that we would be drowned out in it. But also, too, if you go back to previous election cycles where there was talks of Republicans going to Democratic primaries and manipulating the votes, and Democrats coming to Republican primaries to vote for more extreme candidates to make them less attractive in the general election, it kind of can counteracts that. Again, I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's not. It has these other elements to it of you're making essentially an early general election, and you are bringing in all these independent voters that otherwise would not be able to have a voice in the people that are going to be in the general election.
Yeah, that's my whole point, is that let the parties take care of their own primaries and make it easy to have a wide choice on the general.
Yeah, I mean,
Because, open primaries, there's far too many ways to play games. We saw it bad enough in Pennsylvania in 2022. We saw where both parties were encouraging their members to swap party affiliation so they could vote for the worst possible candidate in the opposing party.
Right,
And
but
get the least
wouldn't
electable into the general.
Wouldn't a top 5 open primary defeat the purpose of that? If that was, and it's a ranked choice, right? So you might have 15 or 20 candidates, and you're going to rank your top 5, right?
But that would also probably guarantee that in the general election, where it really counts, there would not be your third parties or independents, depending on how many you are. You're saying top 5, but other states are on top 2.
I don't know if you would get 5. Like, it doesn't make sense to have 5 candidates from a party running a campaign. Like, that's just expensive. So I do understand the concern. I would have to see how it plays out.
Something we have to think about. This is a different paradigm.
Yeah.
We have a party-centric paradigm in our politics.
Correct.
It doesn't have to be. It could be a little bit more candidate-centric. And that's something where basically introducing more candidates on the ballot line as opposed to how many parties appear on the ballot line. How many candidates appear on the ballot line, on the ballot? Boy, we could go on and on. Do we want to transition to our next topic?
Yeah.
Is there anything major that we didn't hit? We did a lot of talk about ballot access requirements, campaigning, lobbying. We didn't really talk much about lobbying here.
Well, that's what I talked about people coming and going from government, and that was based on the lobbying concern.
None of the above.
Redistricting, right? I think that's a major concern for the Reform Party, and trying to contend with gerrymandering and working with, honestly, whoever we need to work with to problem solve how to finally kill that dragon.
Well, this is back to making sure people get the full value of their vote.
Yeah.
I mean, go ahead.
Something I want to point out through all of this, the people listening have seen how all three of us clearly have different opinions. We differ in details. We all agree in principle on this language, on this platform plank. We spent a lot of time coming up with this wording. And that's one thing about the Reform Party, is that we do work by consensus. We strive to form consensus, to find consensus on the goal. We might differ in our details on what best achieves it, but we know what we want.
We want it to be consistent with our mission and our values. And if we differ in ways that two competing ideas that are both consistent with our values, that may stay out of our platform until we resolve it.
Yeah. I was going to say, this is kind of how we do business at times, where we beat our heads against this. We stop, we walk away, it percolates for a little bit, and we come back with new ideas, and we continue that process till we have a solution.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to see the government do.
Yes.
Right. I am now definitely ready to move on.
Okay.
To individual rights and freedoms. Rich, take it away.
I have the first level language on that.
Yes, sir.
All citizens should uphold the U.S. Constitution, including the Bill of Rights and all subsequent amendments. The U.S. Constitution and the Declaration of Independence inform and guide the Reform Party regarding the responsibilities and limits of government and the rights of U.S. citizens. We promote literacy in these documents.
The Reform Party defends the rights of U.S. citizens. Topics of concern include the right to vote as the Constitution provides without restrictions, legally purchase and possess firearms while ensuring responsible ownership and due process as provided by the Constitution, protest peacefully without compromising public safety and without fear of government interference, worship or not as one chooses, pursue and improve life, liberty, and happiness, and lastly, protect each citizen's privacy.
The Reform Party supports limitations on federal government power as stated in Amendment 10 of the Bill of Rights. Quote, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Unquote. All rights include responsibilities. It is the government's duty to promote the general welfare. However, when the government considers curtailing the freedoms of individuals in the performance of its duty, it must be able to provide a compelling governmental interest in doing so. Examples include temporary curfews and travel restrictions. Each instance deserves consideration and must be subject to judicial review when warranted.
I can't give historical context on the party per se, but I want to go straight into that point on peaceful protests. Can I go there, or is there something broader that we should touch on first?
No, because I think that during the convention, that was something that was brought up, which is why it's bolded within the platform.
There are a couple of significant conflicts going on in the world right now. And in the places that are not involved in those conflicts, there are many protests going on. And that's what we're seeing in the news. Peaceful protest. And this is something that the Reform Party, we're not about starting trouble. You know, people talk about, are you a movement? And well, you got to be careful about your definition of that sort of thing. To protest peacefully is if there's, permits on where in the park or in the town square for protests and certain times and this sort of thing. Reform Party people would get the permits and we would follow the rules. The protest would happen and we'd be noisy within constraints and this sort of thing. So we support peaceful protest. And we also believe that if your government is functioning well, that's as much as is going to be necessary in order to be heard.
I am reminded of a conversation I had with a couple of friends of mine. This was last year, actually. And we were talking about the various, quote, peaceful, unquote, protests a couple of years ago that clearly were not. And I don't know what public figure said this first, but it was brought up. Violence is the language of people who are ignored.
Yeah.
So,
good observation.
Yeah.
So peaceful protests, if the government ignores the people, at some point, it is going to escalate.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or if the people feel they are being ignored.
Go ahead and ignore the government and see how long it takes for them to escalate.
Yes. Yes. So, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, the feeling behind this, the intent behind this is good, very good. But in practicality, there's some responsibility that goes with it. There's an unstated assumption that the government or supposedly our representatives are going to take note and address the issues in a meaningful way.
I mean, that's I would say that goes back to the last platform stance that we had of the duty to the citizens that elected officials have. You know, if you have these protests, you got to address them in some way. I mean, obviously you can't just make everybody happy, right? But
right, and that's the reason we have the language at the end of this about rights include responsibilities, and the government needs to have a compelling reason if they're going to step in and curtail one group's rights as opposed to another.
Although I will also give this caveat. You know, just because you're protesting doesn't mean that it's, you know, it's really up to society to determine if what you're protesting about is worthy of response.
Right.
And that's, you know, just because you're protesting doesn't mean that if you get ignored, you get to use violence. But I think a lot of times the protests that have broken out into violence are often on issues that are very central to people's lives and are generally not frivolous things. So it's a matter of that balance. But
and there's a number of topics today that we actually avoid addressing directly for just that reason. But I think that the principle,
you know,
yeah, I was going to say, I think that the principle involved, and this goes back to education to some extent, is that we need to realize that it's okay for people to hold a different opinion than our own, as long as they don't interfere with our rights. Then we don't have the right to interfere in theirs.
Yeah.
We're going to be different.
Any two people. I mean, you can have the same culture, family, everything, and going to be different. Going back to platform language here, we point out the right to vote as the Constitution provides without restrictions. That's in our bullet points early in second level. We just talked about that in the previous topic. And also another one is pursue and improve life, liberty, and happiness. And we talked about that in this episode as well, that as the Reform Party, the Constitution, Bill of Rights, all amendments, and the Declaration of Independence, which definitely shows up here. Pursue and improve life, liberty, and happiness.
I'm looking back at level 1 where we have the final sentence there. We promote literacy in these documents. Is the phrase education is lost on the young? I don't think it is. But after teaching for 8 years, in some ways I feel that some of this education is lost on the young. They don't have the life experience. It's not really relevant to them, right? And that's the thing I'll often get from parents is like, I didn't like social studies whenever I was in high school, but as an adult, like all this stuff is really interesting to me. And it's like, I'm sorry, but this is no longer free. You know, like it's free for your kids, but like you can't, there's nowhere for adults to go once they realize the importance of having literacy in these documents and these founding principles. There's nowhere for them to go and really sit down and learn that. Like, yeah, sure, you can queue up YouTube, but sometimes it's nice just to have somebody that knows what they're doing guide you through it. And you know, it's off on a bit of a tangent, but that's again one of the objectives that I have as vice chair of communications is to find some time at some point to promote literacy in those documents, and partner with groups that do, because it is foundational to understanding your rights and responsibilities. The responsibility to go and vote efficiently, you know? So.
Yeah, I think of, in your words there, Sam, I think of the people who are studying for a citizenship test.
Yeah.
And what manner of citizenship classes exist or should exist, and how the rest of us would benefit. It's kind of like, defensive driving. Taking a refresher every 10 years is probably a smart idea. And maybe something like that, where the citizenship classes, where it's the citizens who perhaps don't know as much as the immigrant working on their citizenship.
Rich, yeah. you just touched on a topic that's been near and dear to me for, I'll say decades. At the risk of upsetting people, I feel that the ability to take the very same test that naturalized immigrants take, naturalized citizens have to take, I feel that the ability to take and pass that test should be a requirement for a high school diploma.
That is a policy position that's worth taking up, definitely.
I mean, that's my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I think that every citizen needs to know what is in our Constitution.
Students in the state of South Carolina, it's not required for graduation, but it is a required test. They all take a U.S. history and U.S. history, and the Constitution is a 11th grade class mostly, and you take an end of course examination at the end of it, and that I think that goes on your high school transcript, and it is 20% of your final grade, and even more. I believe that they have passed a requirement for you to take, it's only like 10 questions, but it's like 10 questions from the U.S. citizenship test. You have to take that and pass that in government class senior year.
I would go
not
so far
as graduation, but you got to do it.
I would go so far as to say that students should be introduced to it in middle school, the first year of middle school, get a refresher a little bit deeper as a freshman, and then get the full 9 yards as seniors, so that's fresh in their mind as they enter society.
Interesting to see how different ideas come forward over time. And this is something I appreciate about the states having control of their education systems, is somebody, can be the early adopter who flushes out the strengths and the weaknesses, and the ideas can be passed elsewhere.
Petri dishes of democracy.
Yes. Well, there's no perfect way.
Yep.
So it's great. I mean, if you're a small country and you don't have, it's not reasonable to subdivide the way the United States are made up of a collection of with their own government entities, and the collection we have allows for different flavors of democratic processes to be implemented. And over time, the better one will show up. You'll see it. And yeah, there's more than one way. And I like the fact that we're seeing some do better and some not do as well. And that shows us, as opposed to the experiment of one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how are we doing, Sam? We did a lot of talking. Man, we could keep going though.
Yeah.
These have been the most interesting some of the most interesting positions that we had to hammer out.
Yes.
You say the best I'm not going to say the best for last, but
Yeah, this is definitely was a more than one session platform committee meetings to work on this one.
Oh yeah.
Well, yeah, this one got us hemmed up at the very end there. That final paragraph.
Yeah. I think we ought to mention that we worked on this overall document for well over a year. It was not an easy task.
No. If you see anyone listening or reading through our platform, if you see things that sound off or contributions want to add to it, connect, get involved. Just even if you just want to contribute on the one topic, then step away.
Yeah. We can always revise it between now and 2024 or 2025. Like
I was going to say,
it's a living document.
Right.
Yes.
It's not carved in stone. It is expected to evolve as we gain greater understanding.
Yes. And then it goes to our convention, which is typically held in presidential election years, but can be called at other times. And the convention itself is the group that decides whether to accept new proposed changes or not. So what we have right now was accepted on October 7th of 2023, and any revisions or additions will be considered at the next convention.
Although I do think that a plank like this, dealing with constitutional rights, I think it is pretty much carved in stone that we are always going to turn to the Constitution as the guiding source for any position.
Well, this is part of our value system.
Yeah.
As a party, we want our government to work well in all places at all times, to the extent that it's possible. And the governing documents are critical to that. And if there's something in the governing documents that doesn't allow good performance of government, we want to look at them too.
I think a good example of that would be the 14th Amendment. That's a case where clearly the original language in the Constitution was flat out wrong, where it limited the right to vote to just a certain class of people. And clearly the intent was what we have now, that any citizen has got the right to vote.
Yes. And the right to the full value of their vote. How are we doing on time, Sam? Do we want to work our way out of this session, or what do you think?
Yeah, we're probably about at an hour.
Okay.
maybe a
Well-
little bit over. So
Do you want to, let's see. Okay. Should I go ahead and wrap us up for tonight?
yeah, I think so.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody who's attended with us. As we've mentioned many times, we appreciate anybody's contributions, email, phone calls, personal visits when we can get together. We hash this stuff out, and as a group, as a party, we want to make sure that we're proposing, suggesting, and supporting the best, most fruitful and efficient ways to operate our government. So this is we've been through our 15 platform planks. We've done it in 6 sessions. And so we're wrapping this up. We have ideas already about getting additional voices in on their input. And in some cases, maybe it's some people we haven't even met yet, and include them in a future podcast episode. So as always, you can find us on our website at reformparty.org. Thank you for listening in.